Welcome to the English Hour on ANN Television. Our guest today is Veronica Morris. With Veronica, we will discuss the role of religion in war and peace in the Middle East today. We will talk about minorities and the problems they face in today's Middle East, as well as the whole situation and question of women's rights in the world today. Our guest, Veronica Morris, is an educationalist. She's taught drama, dance and English. She's Education Officer of the Next Century Foundation. She has lived and worked in England, in Wales, and indeed in Australia. And for 6 years, she worked in the Sultanate of Oman. For some considerable time, she was a shepherdess working on a Welsh hill farm. Veronica is also my wife. Welcome to Veronica. Before we start our discussion, what we were going to do is to watch a short video. In respect of women's rights, Veronica is much concerned with the issue of female genital mutilation, called by some female circumcision. The practice is widespread in some regions of the Middle East, including parts of provincial northern Iraq, Somalia, and the Sudan. It is a practice that has recently been high profile because of press coverage of FMG as conducted by elements of the immigrant community in the United Kingdom. Veronica also feels deeply concerned about the crisis faced by women in war zones. Syria's female refugees have faced unique problems in this regard, and despite assurances from the international community that the refugee issue is a priority, the treatment of some younger women has been nothing short of horrendous. Veronica has a quite natural empathy for the plight of Christians in the region. She once visited Malula in Syria and feels keenly the desperate plight of that ancient community. She is also deeply touched by the problems faced by the Yazidi community, the latest minority group to have come under threat, this time by ISIS, the self-styled Islamic State. Finally, Veronica wishes to talk about the role of religion and peace. The world's great religions all profess support for peace, but are all too often used as an excuse for war. Religious wars have been commonplace throughout history, and indeed, crusades and counter-crusades have become a feature of modern life. Are religious leaders shouldering their responsibility for promoting peace? Does religion, as practiced in today's world, still remain a force for good? Welcome, Veronica. It's good to have you here. It's a real pleasure, actually. But what we were going to talk about, first and foremost, is the women's rights in the Middle East. You're particularly concerned, because I know it's an issue here in Britain, with what we call FMG, female genital mutilation, which is a unique problem, the circumcision of young girls. Tell us why this bothers you.
Well, it's just that I feel, having a daughter of my own, I feel that's such a horrendous thing to be young children to be put through at an early age. And I've heard that on television how it has affected life for that girl for a long time. I mean, it's just, can't believe what they have to go through. And I think this is, something has to be done. Like, I think it's not, what's the word, opposite for illegal in some countries. And I think this country, it should be illegalized.
Well, it is illegal, but what isn't happening is the prosecution of parents who allow FGM. I mean, female circumcision is, of course, a tradition, and we're talking about immigrant communities in the UK who maybe come from Sudan and who feel that this tribal tradition should be continued. But and they would say, of course, that it is essential because the girl would be in a difficult position without this. But you feel it is just a horrendous practice that should be ended.
Well, I do, but it is a cross-cultural thing that I find very difficult when you going across cultures. It's very hard to say this is wrong because you're speaking from another culture, and therefore I realise what's going on. So it's very difficult to speak cross-culturally.
Yes, of course. So I mean, yes, we're holier than thou because
Yes.
we have our own faults, but nonetheless. But I mean, we have in Britain certainly made quite a thing of women's issues just recently with regard to the Middle East anyway. There's been this conference that was held in London, sponsored by the British government, on the situation of women in war zones. And there again, the refugees, the status of women in refugee camps has been highlighted particularly. That's a problem you're concerned about?
I'm concerned about the sort of from northern Iraq, the Yazidis up in northern Iraq that are sort of being persecuted by the ISIS group, and you're just thinking, this has got to stop really, because it's sort of cross-culturally again. This has got to stop, but my heart goes out to all those young girls in sort of threatened by ISIS.
Well, it seems to be a common feature, doesn't it? They're being young women, I mean, whether it's from the Yazidi group or for being taken by Boko Haram in Africa, it's the same situation. Young women are being taken and then married effectively to fighting men, and in a kind of a sad sort of way as comfort women. It's very unfortunate. But what is perhaps more disturbing, oddly, is the situation of young girls in refugee camps, isn't it? Because we're getting these stories of girls being virtually sold into marriage by desperate families that cannot find adequate provisions and so forth.
But it's been denied. Actually, people are saying this is not true. Actually, where is your evidence that this is going on? But it's some people say it is true.
Well, you can deny it or not, but it's certainly the people have been interviewed on world television from the camps and talking about the plight of these children.
Yes.
Sold, I guess, by, I mean, impoverished people. What is the tragedy is that the camps are so badly run and poorly funded that this kind of thing becomes necessary. But the exploitation of children is becoming commonplace.
And you can understand parents sort of, well, you can't actually understand parents selling their child because they've got nothing themselves. They just want some money, and therefore they are almost forced to sell their children to make some money.
Yes, of course they wouldn't call it selling their children. They call it accepting a dowry for a child bride. But it is in this instance it's tantamount to the same thing. Because it's under pressure. And
it is. And there's people in Malula. There was a wonderful
the
area.
Christians, the minorities in Malula.
Minorities there. I mean, just that little, it's such an enclave of sort of, we went to Malula, and it was just a little area of sort of cul-de-sac.
Well,
really.
again, that was the situation in which some of the nuns and so forth were, I believe, persecuted.
Yes.
Sticking to just for a moment to the main theme of the rights of women, and we'll come back to minorities because we do want to talk about Malula and the Christians in Syria, plight of Christians in Syria. But talking about the main theme of women's rights, the situation as we have it now, I mean, is the status of women. You feel, just get back to fundamentals for a moment, because religion often places women in a secondary position. Certainly Christianity, up to a degree Islam, and certainly Judaism. The whole Christian tradition, ranks God first, man second, woman third, in the sense that a woman is supposed to obey her husband, and her husband answers to God. This sort of God, Adam, Eve equation. Do you regard that as wrong?
I believe that men interpret that as men, God, men, and women, but actually it's very Pauline's.
Pauline, Paulian, yes,
yes,
St. Paul.
St. Paul saying men should come first, women should subjugate themselves to men. But I think that's incorrect, because I think there are a lot of very powerful women in the world. And
let's have some examples. Who would be today, or who would you admire in terms of women in today's world?
Women in today's world, I think, I'm trying desperately to think.
Well, like Hillary Clinton, or is she somebody you would admire, or actually, or not? I mean, she's a great supporter of Israel. Who's?
I can think of women before, Gertrude Bell, and that sort of person who actually dressed up as a boy.
Gertrude Bell was a remarkable woman.
Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, travelled through, I think Syria and Iraq. She certainly travelled down through Iraq. We're talking of a historical figure, 19th century, no?
That's right.
Or late 19th century. And she travelled through, all the way down through Iraq as a kind of female explorer on her own.
I know, it's amazing what she did.
Remarkable in those days. I mean, she was a wealthy woman, and she got down, she sort of ended up in Basra, if my memory serves me. And she had this friend, didn't they? Abu Naji, I think his name was. Abu Naji, and she would have tea with Abu Naji in Basra. And to this day, actually, the Iraqis, particularly those from the south, call the British the Abu Naji, because every time those in the south wanted to know what the British were up to, it must have been the early 20th century, actually, now I think about it, Gertrude Bell, because the British were in Iraq. And every time they wanted to know what the British were up to, they would ask Abu Naji, what are the British doing? And Abu Naji would tell them because of his relationship with Gertrude Bell. And so we're called Abu Naji in Iraq to this day.
It's like 3 Cups of Tea. Another lovely book.
Yes. But yes, she's written her biography, hasn't she, Gertrude Bell?
Yes.
So the role of women, you admire women like Gertrude Bell.
I'm trying to think of it.
Others in history.
One.
Well, yes, we certainly need some modern examples.
It would be Indira Gandhi. I thought was amazing. Of course, she was shot.
Yes, she was
assassinated. It's really.
She was a remarkable leader.
Yes.
Quite charismatic, actually. And yes, obviously, women through history. They some of them for their brilliant leadership skills. Some of them are claimed for their beauty. I mean, Cleopatra, Blaise Pascal, I think it was, famously said, had Cleopatra's nose been differently shaped, the whole history of the world would have been altered.
But I think you're right. Hillary Clinton is amazing lady, because she put up with a lot from her husband and forgave him slightly. But I think she was quite a power to be reckoned with. I thought she was a modern lady that I very, very much admire.
Yes. No, she has been remarkable. So men and women are equal in your book, where we have equal rights, equal abilities, but we're different, no?
I think so, yes. Having had boys and girls as children, whatever, you always bring them up the same, but the boys turn up very different from the girls, really. I think they do. Yeah. And I think there is something different between them.
But one should not dominate the other. In other words, we should all treat each other as equals.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in a fair society, fair play to all, equality of opportunity. We're talking about discrimination between men and women, and women's rights, and obviously this This affects all sorts of arenas, and women in war, women in peace, the whole of society. However, there are also minorities that are discriminated against, is what you started to touch
Yes.
on.
And a lot of Christian minorities are being victimised.
Yes.
And in fact, one country, there was a gentleman you were saying spraying people with bullets at a wedding party.
No, that happens, and indeed we see
Iraq.
yes, obviously things have been going on. There have been terrible persecution of minorities, not just Christians, but Christians, Yazidis, and the other minorities in the Middle East. Historically, the Alawites were persecuted, even the Druze. So we have a society that does persecute them. Minorities. That happens everywhere, though. It's happened in Britain. In our grandparents' day, the Jews were looked down on and despised here. So this kind of prejudice against the minority is not unique. We get it here today against Muslims, Islamophobia, in our own country, where...
Because people don't understand them. They always fear what you don't understand. And they don't understand the Muslims, so, oh, they must be different. But actually, once you get to know a Muslim,
well, yeah, but there is part of it is the sense of seeing a difference, isn't it? I mean, when you get here in central London a woman wearing a burqa or whatever, is it provocative? Is it to come to the West or to live in the West? Because many of these girls are English girls who marry Muslims and then adopt formal Muslim garb. Is it acceptable?
You can understand why they do, because they want something to keep themselves from, even if they're English, they want something to actually say, I'm a Muslim. It's making a statement.
Yeah, but is it acceptable in our society here in the West?
But it should be.
You think so?
Yes.
Because you get this whole issue even with regard to schools as to whether... I mean, France, it's illegal to wear a burqa or the veil. Britain is completely open about it, but I sometimes wonder...
But a girl was had up and said, because the teacher said it wouldn't teach.
Yes, that's true. The school, they wouldn't allow her into school.
Well, whether you agree with that or not, you've got to make your own mind up. And basically, I think we've got to let people do it as their religion
dictates.
So
coming back to the Middle East, we have a society, I mean, we have a situation actually. We'll just talk about the Christians for a moment because we are Christians by conviction and by heritage. The Christians, well, we went together to Malula. We remember it fondly, don't we? I mean,
so.
Remarkable place in Syria. I'm sure all of our listeners know of it. It's seminal for Christians in the Middle East. It's perhaps one of the only places that Aramaic, the language of one of the very few places that Aramaic is still spoken. And to be honest, not many speak it there. It is a dying language.
The trouble is it's getting less and less. That's what's so sad, that if you're going to wipe out a place like Malula, you're going to lose the Aramaic language.
And we went on cross day, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Which was quite spectacular. Tell us about that. That was...
Well, they used to, the lovely thatch cottages.
They had bonfires, didn't
Bonfires, yes, huge bonfires. And they actually rolled down, it's a very steep-sided sort of valley, and they'd roll down these huge logs,
yes,
alight, like telegraph poles going down, and they've got thatched cottages.
Well, I think they weren't actually thatched, but yeah, they were little,
they were
little buildings, yes, and they would catch fire.
They would catch fire, and the whole their whole building would go up with the flames.
Well, absolutely.
And you
it did seem like a crazy process. Yes, the little town of Malula down the bottom of the valley, and the Orthodox Christians up on one mountain would build bonfires for Christ and the apostles, and on the other mountain a whole series of bonfires for Christ and the apostles would be built by the Catholic Christians, because it was a mixed Catholic Orthodox village. Well, it still is, it's a small town. And yes, as you say, it was spectacular then through the night as they rolled these burning down logs down on their own town to see which community could make the greatest spectacle.
And if you were in the way of one of these, I remember we were
Yeah.
standing there and it just went past us. And you thought, "Ooh,"
Yeah,
were
you
a bit
had
flattened
to
by
jump out of the street
Yeah.
because it would be quite something.
them. It would be.
It was quite an amazing event, an amazing anachronistic society. Cross Day is not celebrated in the West. It's something uniquely Middle Eastern. And there you are. I mean, we had this occasion in this beautiful village. We were all catered for and cared for and much loved, and we enjoyed our adventure in Syria. And yet that town was a war zone, and has been a war zone, hasn't it?
Well, it has. In fact, the Muslim Brotherhood
Well, it wasn't the Muslim. It was a terrorist group, a particularly violent insurgent group, took over, and then only now has it became a cause célèbre for the Christians of Syria to liberate Malula, and it was liberated.
But you think of all these places that need liberating. Who's going to liberate them? Is it going to be governments liberating them? And where are those governments going to be liberating them?
Yeah, the Christian minorities have had a hard time in Iraq today, and in Palestine, actually, oddly enough. That the one of the oddities is that the Christians live along the fault line between the Israelis and the Jews. So areas like Bethlehem, between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So areas like Bethlehem, Christian areas, are at the cutting edge between Palestinian society and Israeli society. And it has destroyed a town like Bethlehem. I mean, the wall, the famous wall, goes right through the middle of the town and is horrendous. The consequences are horrendous. So we're seeing the Middle East being purged of Christians as Christians emigrate.
And you think that these governments have got to come on board, sort of, because there's so much money going in and to ISIS, and where is all this money coming from? You're thinking, some governments must be giving these ISIS some money. So
yes.
Where do you think that money's coming from?
Well, I mean, in terms of, you're talking of ISIS as a major persecutor of minorities, and it certainly is. Islamic State, Daesh, I believe my Arabic pronunciation is terrible, but yes, it is a major persecutor of minorities, and one wonders why. You'd think it was counterproductive, but they've been brutally cruel to the Yazidi community. Where there's funding coming from, oil sales to Turkey, $800 million and counting, taxes locally that they levy as in the areas they control on trade and on businesses, and funding by patrons from the Gulf. I mean, there are many people that fund ISIS, Islamic State. They are perhaps one of the richest groups in the region, oddly.
Well, which governments do you suppose?
It's not so much governments. It is more, except in possibly, arguably, in the case of Turkey, where oil sales are permitted and oil is not smuggled. It goes in cross-border quite legitimately under the eyes of Turkish border guards in great lorries, so that's not a smuggling operation. But otherwise, I don't think by and large it's governments per se. It's rich, wealthy people who feel that they can fund jihad. And it's misguided, I guess. But certainly the minorities in Iraq have been suffering. The Yazidis are particularly because they're perceived as angel worshippers and therefore given a hard time because they're not people of the book. They're not Muslims, Christians, or Jews, so they get a rougher ride. But what to do about that, I don't know. I mean, we can't bomb these groups out of
course not.
existence.
I mean, does the Saudis give some money coming through that way?
Well, individuals, yes. I think individuals I trust and hope that none of the Arab governments are funding these extreme groups. Who knows? I mean, but it is true that it is a kind of proxy war that's going on between the Sunni Islam and Shiite Islam, and again, just the fault zone, the cutting edge is the Christian community. Tragic.
It is.
Let's. We said we'd talk about women's rights. We've done so. We've touched on minorities. You wanted also to talk on the role of religion and peace. Religion in today's world. I mean, it sounds bizarre to talk about religion as a force for bad, but is it? I mean, do we? These people are fighting in the name of Christianity, Islam, Judaism. In Israel, much of the settlement activity on the West Bank is predicated on the concept that Israelis have a right, because the Bible tells them so, to what they call Judea and Samaria. In ISIS and Islamic State, their violence is predicated on the right they feel they have to establish a caliphate, because that is part of Islamic history, and they are Salafists. They want to go back to basics. They want to go back to the beginning. And Christians are not much better. Historically, we have fought wars on the basis of crusades for Christianity. I mean, these days, in this 21st century, much of our fighting is for the sake of hubris and pride, but we've been killing each other in Northern Ireland and so on, in religious conflict. Is religion a force for good or evil?
It's difficult. I was looking at it just then. I was just thinking, well, is it a force for good? And one can only pray that it is. And I believe that genuine Christians, Muslims, Roman Catholics, all sects, different sects, the genuine, if you get down to the nitty-gritty and you believe what you believe, but as long as you don't believe I'm better than you are, that's the problem. If you think you're in a better religion than somebody else, I think you've got to pare it all down to say, we're all one people, because we're all living in this on this beautiful earth, and we're just one person, one people, not hundreds of different people. If we could actually think that, okay, where I've got legs, hands, feet, and walk about the earth, we're just placed on this earth for a very short time. We should take most care of it as we can, and not treat anybody as different as anybody else. And if we could do that, we could live peaceably. And I hope we can live as peaceably as that.
No, I would hope so. You think of, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Jesus Christ, God bless him, and whoever else you like to name, Abraham, Isaac, and the rest, if they looked down on the earth today, they would weep, wouldn't they? At the fact that religion is used as.
It's one sort of thing came because it's in the Gospels. Jesus wept, and you just think, I could really sort of feel that he'd weep at this situation here now. He really would.
And yet the world's religious leaders have no courage, are completely wet, really.
Now, wait a minute, they seem to have no courage. You don't know that. You're saying they've got no courage.
Well, do they take any real leadership? I mean, have we seen a real, I know there's a little, but have we seen real forceful statements from Sunni religious leaders against terrorism? Have we seen Christian religious leaders truly stand up against prejudice and the hatred of the other? Do we see any real lead? Aren't religious leaders mostly pretty pathetic?
I think the Pope has come out and said, really talking much more about what should be done and how he could help the world, or try to. I think he's made a statement such as that.
It hasn't made much impression on me.
Well,
I mean, I can't even remember
name.
hearing or seeing. If I have to, I struggle to. I know there were one or two British imams that made some good statements, but I struggle to find in my mind's eye a picture of a religious leader making a strong statement about war and peace and the way conditions in the world today. It's.
I think the only person that I can think of, because he's got such a lot to lose, is the Dalai Lama.
Yes, you're right, actually. Yes, he is one of the few that has said a lot in this subject. I did go to see him in an audience, and he said, this hand is not for hitting, this hand is for hugging. He's rare in today's world. There are few religious leaders of his courage or status, which is greatly saddening, actually.
It is.
Yes, but presumably, religion is predicated on peace. It's interesting too, this idea that the West has developed of not talking to your enemies, and it's becoming common in Islam now. The reluctance of groups like Hamas to talk to the Israelis or whatever, and yet the Prophet Muhammad, of course, said always talk to his enemies, whether he was going to go to battle with them or not. But I mean, he would talk to them.
I think the great thing is communication. Unless you can talk to the other person and understand them, if you don't actually talk to them, and children in this world, this life in London, don't talk to anybody because they're on Twitter all the time.
Oh, well, that's a different issue, yes.
No, if people just talk to each other, they'd understand what the other person thought. But people don't talk. It's not a thing that people do anymore. And I do believe that communication is a great thing to do, to communicate with other people, just to talk to them. You know, it's so easy to do, but people don't. People have their own little world. And I think that's the best thing to do, to communicate with people.
Yeah, well, I hope so. These virtual boundaries we face, I mean, in the... but maybe the internet age is the salvation of the world, not the end of the world. Maybe people will talk more cross cultures through this very medium, Twitter and the internet, Facebook. But
quietly, they're doing it all on the little iPads.
Well, that's...
you know, to do it, you say the internet, fine, but you can reach thousands of people, but still in a little world of their own.
So religion, you feel, after all, is a force for good, or could be?
Oh, I do. Well, why after all? Of course it could be.
I mean, despite the fact that it is a weapon of war. I mean, it is a weapon of war, isn't it? ISIS have their black flags. I mean, they are fighting in the name of religion as they perceive it. And we in the West are just the same. The whole ethos, the whole driving of people to war with religion, this whole carrying of banners in warfare is yes. I really begin to question whether religion is honourable as we practice it today. And I know I'm going over the same ground, but it disturbs me greatly that the religion is basically the place where cowards live. It's in that safe religious area where they can deny the brotherhood and fellowship of mankind, the all for one and one for all ethos that we should all believe in.
Well, I find that's very sad, and maybe it's going to take a woman to stir us all up, because men say, oh, and I think, you know, I think this is a time, place for it, and I do believe that it will happen. But maybe with a women leader
I
somewhere.
would hope, but then yes, the women. I mean, you look at them through history. The women, when they have come into leadership roles, have become some of our greatest warriors. I mean, Boadicea, Joan of Arc, and Maggie Thatcher. You know, I mean, whomever. The women are as much for war, it seems to me, as men when they have positions of power and authority. Or is that unfair?
No, I think that's quite true, actually.
Yeah.
I think once you get into a position of power, then you actually think differently, possibly.
Yes.
Having never been in that position, I don't think differently.
Yes. Well, one would hope, by the grace of God, we will find some good leaders. I do find it hard in a world in which leaders themselves are so driven by hubris, by false pride, as our nations, that I find it hard to imagine truly admirable leaders. We may stand on the shoulders of giants, but we seem to be minnows in today's world. I mean, we're all very weak. But perhaps we will again see the likes of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. I mean, there are and have been people of great courage and great status in leadership.
We're talking about martyrs as well at the same time. That's the trouble.
Yes, that's true. Let's move on from religion and move to our next topic, Veronica. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Veronica, so now the book you've chosen is interesting, I think. It's From the Holy Mountain. It's written by William Dalrymple, and it's published by HarperCollins. It's a remarkable book, Harper Press, published in London, and indeed this edition, I think, was published in 1997. No, it was first published in 1997, indeed, in hardback.
Yes, I find it a very, very witty book. It's a lovely book.
And this was the book that inspired you to go to Syria in the first place.
Exactly.
And because you were inspired by Syria by William Dalrymple's book From the Holy Mountain. Actually, the Holy Mountain he's referring to is Sinai, Mount Sinai, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
But he's talking of his travels through the Levant,
that's right.
Which culminate in Syria, and he's a brilliant travel writer.
Very, very good. Very amusing too. I find it difficult. Yeah. Some of these books are very dry, but this one has got funny parts as well.
So you'd commend From the Holy Mountain by William Dalrymple. It was actually the book. I mean, you say it's the book that took us to Syria. We went to some of the very, very places that are mentioned, of course, in this book. One of the most dramatic, I think, was Crac de Chevalier, wasn't it?
Absolutely. We haven't mentioned that.
No, amazing place. A castle, like something out of the space age. The walls were as thick as this room, and you could 300 horses at the top. Great Crusader castle, and Saladin took it in the end, but it took Saladin. Well, it took him a year or more, I think.
Yes.
I'm not much of a historian, I can't remember, but we should read the book again. But it took him some considerable time, but he eventually took it.
Yes, and Lawrence of Arabia, I believe, is locked up in the same
place.
Well,
he had used it as his base.
He did.
There was a little room there where he was, and when during his crusade, that's the wrong word, isn't it? But his fight, it's a remarkable place, and you think of that now as again focal point for war between. I hear tell that it's been a base for fighting between government forces and rebels. Very sad in a way that today's Syria has become what it has become. The other thing that our journey in Syria touched on, which I think most of our Syrian listeners will be aware of, but perhaps others will not. We went around with an olive merchant, didn't we?
Yes,
took us for the first time on our first trip. Well, I say an olive merchant, but I mean he was a food
importer.
merchant. Yes, that's right. dear friend of ours, and we stayed in a little village just outside of Damascus, and I remember him saying that the olive tree originated in Syria, not as, I don't want to be controversial, but not as most people think, in Palestine, because there are so many varieties of olive in Syria, just countless varieties, which are nowhere else in the Middle East. So it is because of that it also makes it very difficult for Syrians to export their olive oil, because it comes in so many different types and variations, unlike other countries that have a simpler olive culture. But it is remarkable. In fact, when we were there, we used to know the names of the different. He taught us the names, but I forget now.
I think I can just say taha, which means date.
Oh, does it? I'm not sure. But anyway, but I do remember that trip was special. All inspired by William Dalrymple. The book is in print. It's in print in hardback and in paperback from the Holy Mountain, it's an interesting.
It's well worth a read.
It's well worth a read indeed. Okay, all credit to him, and the first of our book reviews here on ANN, and bless you for bringing this book to our attention.
Well, thank you. Thank you.